It is Thursday, the 15th of January, 2026. Almost slipped up there. And today is a snow day, especially where I am. It's going to be snowing all day, which I do love the snow, but it's kind of a blizzard. And so working out at home. So no rush to leave. Anyway, up at 4 a.m. and I put together two different articles that I posted through LinkedIn and I shared with people and had conversations with some fairly influential people within Canadian and international politics. And we had some backs and forth over a huge court case that is going to be happening tomorrow, which I'll get into. But before I do, Francois Legault announces resignation as Quebec Premier. For anyone that is not from Canada, I'm sure you don't really care too much about this, but someone that was born and raised in Quebec follows Quebec politics. I've been saying since the beginning, Francois Legault should be in jail. He is hugely corrupt. What happened during even during COVID and with huge infrastructure projects because of this guy, anyway, so many issues, long story longer, and he deserves jail. So he gets to resign just like everyone else, no accountability. But a lot of people that I've talked to, they're celebrating this right now. Thank fucking God is what they're saying. Sorry for swearing. And they do want someone like Eric Duhaime, Duhaime, to be the one. He's the conservative representative in Quebec. And people really hope that he is the one that wins. Eric Duhaime was born in Montreal on April 15th, 1969, grew up in Laval. So I'm going to be asking some friends and family if they know him or of him, because again, Laval is actually where my mother lives right now. I'm not going to say exactly where, but I know many people that live in Laval. Anyway, so now on to, just before I forget, because I didn't post any stories on that yesterday, and because there were bigger things happening yesterday. I think this is very important, that the Clintons be held accountable for refusing to share what they know and about Epstein and about so many other things, and we'll see how that kicks off this year. Very interesting, but anyway.
Hold up, Hillary. What was that again?
No one is above the law.
Well, here we are again. I don't think it's any secret. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton joined her husband in defying a bipartisan lawful congressional subpoena to show up today. I think what's most disappointing to the Oversight Committee is the fact that we have, in good faith, negotiated with the Clintons' attorneys for 5 months. Throughout the past 5 months, they've implied to us they were trying to make a date work. In fact, the last date we had, they notified us 3 days beforehand, said that they would love to come, but they have a funeral to attend. And we have bent over backwards to try to schedule the Clinton. No, I'm still talking. I'm still talking. Go ahead. Hey, get him out of here. You're not even a reporter. Get out of here.
Not even a reporter.
So here's the situation. We're going to hold both Clintons in criminal contempt of Congress. We believe that because this subpoena was issued in a bipartisan fashion, the Democrats acted the day that the subpoenas were voted on in the subcommittee like they wanted the Clintons to come.
Wait, hold up, Hillary. What was that again?
No one is above the law, including you hag. Anyways. I'm just going through my Instagram posts and Twitter before I get into my articles. And so this is a Canadian-born Punjabi trucker. I say Canadian. He's a Canadian. And he's known as Sunny, and he unleashed a raw, no-holds-barred rant against Indian-owned trunking companies and their employees, accusing them of rampant corruption, fake licenses, and zero regard for public safety. There's so much more that he talks about, but I'm glad that people that are truck drivers and that are within the community, so to speak, not really, again, he's Canadian, but are calling out people that are coming here, especially in the last few years, and grifting, causing a lot of harm and death. And I don't know if people are even tracking just how bad this is. There was another accident, a collision. I think it was in Quebec. Fairly certain it was in Quebec, but where there was no one that died, luckily, but there was something like over 100 plus people that were passengers on a train that was derailed. Why? Because two transport trucks, okay, and you know who was involved in that, all right? Okay, not to sound racist or anything like that. That stats are stats. And yeah, they were the ones that parked ridiculously close to the railroad, and where it actually struck the two transport trucks. And again, the train derailed. We need trains in Canada more and more, like as a stronger means of transportation. And it's getting, again, this is another company that is getting that is going under and losing a lot of money and has not had the capacity to build more infrastructure or even maintain rail lines, etc. Because again of where the money is going and what we're focusing on, right? And so, anyways, the rail in Gaspé as well. Like, we really need to maintain and keep that railway system going. And it's been closed and then opened and it's a mess. But again, we got to sort that out. Long story again, but this is a Canadian-born person that I guess maybe his parents come from India, from Punjabi. Anyway, his take.
He didn't fucking care. He didn't think that like fucking he'd kill somebody. He had no fucking remorse, and that's what these guys are all like. This guy just got caught, but they do this every day. They hit people, they crash into people, they cause accidents, casualties all the time. Since these immigrants started coming here, our truck insurance doubled up.
So do you have a message to what you call the Indian employers? Do you have a message? They're watching you right now. What do you say?
They should go back to their fucking country and stop fucking with mine. Straight up. You guys destroyed my fucking industry. You guys think you're doing well and you're successful because you're able to get trucks. Because you're charging fucking LMI drivers fucking $40,000 to start. That's enough for a down payment for any fucking brand new truck. And then you guys pay them cents on the dollar, even if you fucking pay them. And also you guys neglect fucking maintenance. You guys are not smart business guys. You guys are not good for the industry. You guys are fucking everything up. And the government, I don't know why the fuck they allowed you guys to do this, but it's unacceptable. Now think, what if I came into your fucking country and did this bullshit? Would you like it? But that guy didn't fucking care. He didn't think that like fucking he'd kill somebody. He had no fucking remorse. And that's what these guys are all like.
And he's saying that his insurance, and I could totally see that it doubled because of what's going on. Okay, I did find an article regarding the Via Rail train derailment. And so this was the 12th. Again, this was just a few days ago. Via rail train with passengers on board derails in Bas-Saint-Laurent. Okay, so it was in Quebec after collision. And again, let's see here. A Via Rail train derailed after colliding with two semi-trailer trucks in Saint-Alexandre de Kamouraska in Quebec's Bas-Saint-Laurent region early Monday morning. According to Nouveau Info, 4 people were sleeping in the 2 trucks when they were violently struck at 1:30 a.m. They were not injured. The 124 Via Rail passengers on board the train were also evaluated. The passengers were taken to the local city hall before resuming their journey to Halifax by bus. The passengers of another Via train heading in the opposite direction were also transferred to buses for the remainder of the trip as the track was blocked. The investigation launched, so we'll get more, but we know who the company was. And people are saying they know the company, and they are saying that this is a company that, again, has been known to give fake licenses, certifications, et cetera, and allowing people to be on the road that don't have any business being on the goddamn road. Yeah, someone who had to deal personally with my ex, from a truck driver, newly Canadian, ran through a red light in a very small town, hitting a young mother and running her over, and she had to push her young children out of the way. He then drove away, parked, and hid and watched the chaos unfold. My ex was one of the ones trying to perform CPR on her and trying to help, but she was mush. It fucked him up beyond belief, and there was no reason why he should have been going 30 kilometers over the speed limit in a 50 zone in a small town. Okay, this is anecdotal. I haven't fact-checked this. Okay, so this guy's a Canadian through and through. Can tell dude was born here. Yeah, right? It was never about race, but about how they meshed with our culture, and this guy has clearly done well. A lot of people love this guy for calling this out. And there was more examples here, but maybe they're hidden now. Yeah, not about skin color. It's being part of the culture. Agreed. Yeah, he's definitely got the Canadian accent. God, I want to know the company. Anyway, I can just Google it, but Anyway, that's fine. I'll find it later.
Canada is rebuilding its military, not to defend our borders, not to secure the Arctic, not to fix recruitment, equipment, or veterans care. According to Mark Carney, the priority is Ukraine, NATO commitments, overseas training, logistics, and joint deployments. Canadian money, Canadian soldiers, Canadian risk, foreign purpose. And at the exact same time, Chrystia Freeland slides into an economic leadership role tied to Ukraine, the country that just happens to be staring at one of the largest reconstruction jackpots in modern history. Hundreds of billions, infrastructure, energy, finance, defense contracts. You're supposed to believe this is a fucking coincidence? Fuck off. This isn't national defense. This is Canada being repositioned as a service provider. Muscle, money, and credibility, while political elites line themselves up to shape the post-war economy. And fuck only knows the back-end deals and kickbacks that are happening. Back home, Canadians can't get doctors, cities are rotting, housing is unreachable, food is unaffordable, veterans are ignored, and the Arctic is exposed. Yet somehow we can afford endless foreign commitments and global virtue signaling. The war gets moral cover, the money gets moved, the alliances get strengthened, the insiders get position, and Canadians, we don't get security, we don't get stability, we do get fucked though. So no, none of this is accidental. This military isn't being rebuilt for Canada. It's being rebuilt to serve alliances, influence, and post-war power plays. Canadians are just the piggy bank. Canada is rebuilding its military, not to defend our borders, not to secure the Arctic, not to fix recruitment, equipment, or veterans care. According to Mark Carney, the priority is Ukraine, NATO commitments, overseas training, logistics, and joint deployments. Canadian money, Canadian soldiers, Canadian risk, foreign purpose. And at the exact same time, Chrystia Freeland slides into an economic leadership role tied to Ukraine, the country that just happens to be staring at one of the largest reconstruction jackpots in modern history. Hundreds of billions, infrastructure, energy, finance, defense contracts. You're supposed to believe this is a fucking coincidence? Fuck off. This isn't national defense. This is Canada being repositioned as a service provider. Muscle, money, and credibility, while political elites line themselves up to shape the post-war economy. And fuck only knows the back-end deals and kickbacks that are happening.
Oh, we know.
Back home,
Not
Canadians can't get doctors, cities are rotting, housing is unreachable.
All right, so that's going to segue into the article that I posted on LinkedIn. Okay, so analysis of the Ukrainian 2014 coup, systemic corruption, and the provocation of Russia. So yeah, that was my morning. Intelligence brief, the Western engineered conflict in Ukraine. Subject, analysis of the 2014 coup, systemic corruption, and the provocation of Russia. Because people think that this happened in 2022. No, it didn't. It absolutely didn't. Classification, geopolitical analysis, historical review. Executive summary. This report challenges the prevailing Western narrative regarding the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. A forensic review of events from 2013, and this is very important, 2013, to the present indicates that the current war is not an unprovoked act of aggression by the Russian Federation, but the inevitable kinetic result of a decade-long strategy of encirclement, provocation, and regime change engineered by the United States and NATO. The conflict's roots lie in the orchestrated overthrow of a democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014, the subsequent installation of a proxy regime in Kiev, and the systemic looting of Ukrainian assets by the Western military-industrial complex. The evidence suggests that Ukraine's sovereignty was not stolen by Moscow, but sold to Washington and Brussels. The 2014 coup d'etat, NATO's regime change operation. The standard Western timeline claims the conflict began with Russia's annexation of Crimea. This is historically inaccurate. The conflict began with the violent foreign-backed removal of President Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014, an event legally and definitionally constituting a coup. The economic trigger, the better deal. In late 2013, Ukraine faced financial collapse. President Yanukovych weighed two competing bailout offers. I bet a lot of people didn't know that. The EU Association Agreement, a predatory loan package from the IMF demanding severe austerity measures, pension cuts, and a sharp rise in consumer gas prices for Ukrainian citizens. Sound familiar? Because they've been doing this type of thing all over the goddamn world. I keep on using the Lord's name in vain. I'm so sorry. Anyway, the Russian Federation offer a direct 15 billion purchase of Ukrainian bonds and a 33% discount, on natural gas supplies with no requirements to cut social spending. Yanukovych, acting in the economic interest of his electorate, chose the Russian deal. This sovereign decision triggered an immediate regime change operation. So he did what was best for his people, for Ukraine, and for Russia, and for Europe. Anyway. Direct U.S. intervention. Evidence of U.S. orchestration in the Maidan Revolution is documented and verifiable. The Nuland, yes, that Nuland, Victoria Nuland, Piet call, the Nuland Piet call, a leaked intercept between Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Piet, or Payet, however you want to pronounce it, exposed Washington handpicking Ukraine's future leadership. Nuland explicitly stated Yats is the guy, referring to Arseniy Yatsenyuk. I always pronounce it so bad, but anyway, Yatsenyuk, who was installed as prime minister days after the coup. Funding the unrest. Nuland publicly admitted the U.S. had invested $5 billion in Ukraine to promote democracy, diplomatic shorthand for funding opposition NGOs and political agitation. The violence. The Maidan protests transitioned from peaceful demonstrations to armed insurrection, with snipers firing on both police and protesters to create chaos. I said that right. There was blue on blue. The resultant power vacuum allowed for the installation of a fiercely anti-Russian government that immediately moved to disenfranchise Russian-speaking populations in the Donbass and Crimea areas. Systemic corruption and the proxy economy. Since 2014, the post-coup government in Kiev has functioned less as a sovereign state and more as a laundromat for Western capital and political influence. The Burisma nexus, the integration of Hunter Biden onto the board of Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy giant, while his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, managed Ukraine policy, epitomizes the pay-to-play nature of the new regime. The dismissal of Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin, who was investigating Burisma after Vice President Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees, remains a matter of public record. Selling the country. Under the guise of reconstruction, and by the way, it wasn't vice president, it was president, so I gotta redo this. I mean, when it first started, he was vice president, so that's not wrong, but it carried on when he became president as well. Actually, you know what? I will keep it at that because, again, this started before he became president. So just to be clear, I don't want any corrections on that. Anyway, so selling the country, very important. Under the guise of reconstruction, the Zelensky administration has effectively privatized the Ukrainian state for the benefit of Western asset managers. So not for the West, for the asset managers. BlackRock and JP Morgan. In 2023, the Zelensky government formalized a partnership with BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase to launch the Ukraine Development Fund. This arrangement effectively positions global finance giants to acquire state assets, energy grids, and agricultural land at distressed prices post-war. Land reform. Controversial laws passed post-2019 lifted the moratorium on the sale of agricultural land. Critics argue this paved the way for Western agribusiness conglomerates to acquire Ukraine's black earth, Chernozem, some of the most fertile soil on the planet, stripping Ukrainian farmers of their heritage. Wartime graft. Despite the influx of billions in Western aid, corruption remains endemic. In 2023 and 2024 and 2025, I've shared more where they're showing like cash money hidden in people's homes and offices. Anyway. Okay. Multiple high-level Ukrainian defense officials were dismissed following scandals involving the purchase of military rations at inflated prices and the disappearance of humanitarian aid. That's just like one small part. This pattern suggests that a significant percentage of Western taxpayer money is being siphoned off by the Kiev elite rather than reaching the front lines. The provocation, NATO expansion, and the Minsk betrayal. The Russian Federation's security concerns were consistently dismissed by the West, creating an existential threat on Russia's border that no great power would tolerate. No great power would tolerate that. And again, I've talked about this on so many videos where NATO, with the expansion of security and defense infrastructure and personnel bordering Russia, and even Russia asking to be part of NATO for decades and it being dismissed. Broken promises. I'm not saying what Putin's doing right now in the war is justified at all. I'm not a Putin propagandist at all. I do believe that he should be investigated as well and held criminally responsible for his actions within and involvement with war crimes and crimes against humanity, et cetera, as well. But the next person that goes in to replace Putin, I'm hoping is democratically elected and can unfuck the mess that, they are in and have an alliance with Ukraine and with the US, because they are more aligned with us than other countries that we're trying to do business with. Anyways, it's just all over the place. Focus. Okay, so the expansion of NATO into Russia's borders violates the spirit of assurances given to Soviet leadership in 1990 that the alliance would move not 1 inch eastward. Since then, NATO has absorbed nearly even every former Warsaw Pact nation, placing missile systems minutes from Moscow. The sabotage of peace, the Minsk Accords. The Minsk I and II agreements, 2014-2015, were designed to peacefully reintegrate the Donbas region into Ukraine by granting it limited autonomy. Yeah, so the West didn't want Russia to have that land. They wanted the land. So let's just be clear with that. The deception, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel and former French President François Hollande have since admitted that the Minsk agreements were a ruse. They were not intended to bring peace, but to buy time for Ukraine to arm itself and build a NATO standard military capable of crushing the Donbass separatists. Yeah. So Ukrainians that were in support of Russia and wanted to be part of Russia, they were calling them the separatists, obviously, and they were getting killed and they were getting oppressed, targeted, political prisoners, religious prisoners, etc., etc. The aggression for 8 years, 2014 to 2022, the Ukrainian military shelled civilian areas in Donetsk and Luhansk, killing over 14,000 people. This sustained military campaign against ethnic Russians on Russia's border was the direct precursor to the 2022 intervention. Conclusion. The narrative that Ukraine is a blameless victim of imperial aggression collapses under scrutiny. The historical record demonstrates that the 2014 government change was a Western-backed coup, not a democratic transition. The economic orientation of Ukraine was forcibly shifted from a pragmatic deal with Russia to a predatory dependency on the EU and Western banks. The security crisis was manufactured by NATO's refusal to rule out Ukrainian membership, crossing a clearly defined Russian red line. And so the assessment, the conflict is a tragedy of Western design. Ukraine had a path to neutrality and prosperity in 2013 by accepting the Russian deal. Instead, it was manipulated into becoming a battering ram against Russia, resulting in the destruction of its infrastructure, the loss of its territory, and the sale of its future to Western corporations. And by the way, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of deaths. The aggression in strategic terms originated in the West. Okay, so there's so much more I can expand on, but again, there's only so many words you can put in an article before people get bored. And so if anyone has any opinions or feedback on that or anything else that you'd like to add or things that I haven't mentioned in previous videos, let me know. And if not, then I will get into Canada's Emergency Act. All right, it's on X. This is very important to Canada. I really hope the right choice is made tomorrow. Okay. So this is from Keith Wilson KC. Breaking. The Federal Court of Appeal will be releasing its decision this Friday, so tomorrow, on whether the federal government broke the law by invoking the Emergencies Act against peaceful protesters during the 2022 Freedom Convoy. And it says here, and froze my client's bank account. So this has been circulating. So this is parties, members of the public, and members of the profession. Chief Justice de Montigny. This was yesterday. Upcoming decision in Attorney General of Canada versus Canadian Civil Liberties Association, AAL. Files A7324, consolidated with A74-24, A75-24, and anyways. And so this will be important. There's a lot of hilarious tweets on this as well. Some people, again, they've lost hope. So there's people saying that the House always wins. Not getting my hopes up here. Justice Mosley made the airtight ruling on the letter of the law, with the caveat that he was at the very end of his career. He doesn't believe that there will be people willing to do that again. Karen, I'd be hopeful, but sadly, we all know our Federal Court of Appeal is stacked with liberals. They won't let Mark Carney down. Hate to be so cynical, but we saw what happened during the SNC-Lavalin affair. It was definitely an educational experience on how liberals operate. That's a good point. Jail Trudeau. Okay, so he's liberals guilty of shutting down bank accounts or Orwellian action that will never be forgiven. For this reason, I will resist any introduction of digital ID. Okay, so will there be consequences if they did break the law? They did, and they're appealing it. The Crown is appealing this because they're disgusting. Respectfully, the people that are doing this, ushered in by Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, Marco Mendicino, Bill Blair. Taxpayers are funding this, but anyways, that's tomorrow. And the reason why it's important is because it sets precedence for the next Prime Minister on using the Emergency Act in an authoritarian move. Okay, so I put the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as my photo. Title: Weaponizing Fear, the Freedom Convoy, the Courts, and the Fight for Accountability. So this Friday, 14 January, oh, I said 14 to 16, god damn it. Let me see here. All right. This Friday, 16 January 2026, the Federal Court of Appeal, with Chief Justice Yves de Montigny presiding, will announce their decision on whether the Canadian government broke the law when it invoked the Emergency Act against the Freedom Convoy protesters back in 2022. This was significant for Canada because the original ruling had found that using the Emergency Act that way was unconstitutional, and now we'll see if that ruling stands or gets overturned. And so you've got a link here to the Canadian Constitution Foundation and their work on this and their pieces. Assessment report: Judge Mosley's ruling and the unconstitutionality of the Emergency Act invocation during the Freedom Convoy. Weaponizing fear, the Freedom Convoy, the courts, and the fight for accountability. So in January 2024, so 2 years ago now, Judge Mosley ruled that the invocation of the Emergency Act during the Freedom Convoy was unconstitutional. This report will outline the reasoning behind that ruling and provide strong examples supporting why the Freedom Convoy did not warrant such extreme measures. Additionally, we will discuss why the government's decision to appeal this ruling is a misuse of public funds and a continuation of a political narrative that misrepresented the convoy. Judge Mosley's ruling: the core reasons for unconstitutionality. Failure to meet the legal threshold. Judge Mosley determined that the Emergency Act was invoked without meeting the strict legal criteria required for its use. The Act is intended for situations of national emergency where no other laws can effectively maintain public order. In this case, Mosley found that existing laws were sufficient and that the situation did not pose a threat to Canada's security or sovereignty. Protection of charter rights. Mosley also emphasized that the invocation violated the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The right to peaceful assembly is a fundamental constitutional right, and the convoy participants were exercising this right. The use of emergency powers was a disproportionate response that infringed upon these freedoms without sufficient justification. Strong examples supporting the ruling. Comparison to other protests and the double standards. As previously outlined, other protests in Canada that involved more significant disruption or violence did not lead to the use of emergency powers. For instance, protests that included vandalism, threats against police, or aggressive confrontations were managed with standard law enforcement methods, or not at all. The Freedom Convoy, by contrast, was overwhelmingly peaceful. It did not pose the kind of threat that would justify invoking the Emergencies Act. Internal acknowledgements and political motivations. Internal reports from law enforcement and government agencies confirmed that the legal threshold for the Emergencies Act was not met. The decision to invoke it appears to have been driven by political motives rather than genuine necessity. This misuse of the act not only violated the rights of the protesters, but also set a dangerous precedent for future government responses to peaceful dissent. Peaceful. Constitutional violations, key charter rights. A. Freedom of assembly and expression, Section 2. The Charter guarantees fundamental freedoms, including freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. The Freedom Convoy, by and large, was a peaceful assembly of citizens expressing dissent. Invoking the Emergency Act disproportionately restricted these freedoms without sufficient justification. Legal rights, Section 7. Section 7 of the Charter protects the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. The sweeping powers granted by the Emergency Act led to arrests and asset freezes that many legal experts argued were not in line with fundamental justice, especially since other legal avenues were available. Democratic rights and accountability, Section 1. Under Section 1, any limitation on charter rights must be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. The Emergency Act's invocation failed this test because the government did not provide compelling evidence that existing laws were insufficient or that the situation met the high bar of a national emergency. Internal government assessment and law enforcement options. Law enforcement warnings before invocation. Reports emerged that the RCMP and other law enforcement bodies advised the federal government that the situation did not meet the threshold for invoking the Emergency Act. In fact, some internal documents from early 2024 revealed that both law enforcement and government legal advisors had raised concerns about the lack of necessity. Precedent of non-invocation in more disruptive protests. Other protests in Canada, such as certain LGBTQ+, Black Lives Matter, or pro-Palestinian protests, have led to significant disruptions, including threats to law enforcement, attacking counter-protesters or journalists, blocking service routes, property damage, desecrating churches, and more. None of these protests resulted in the Emergency Act being invoked. Jail times, bank accounts frozen, or other extreme measures consistent with the Freedom Convoy response, which shows a clear bias in the government's response, and no one in jail for years, declared as domestic terrorist, none of that stuff as well. But again, there's only so much I can write in this. And it's tomorrow, so I wanted to get this done. I only started this morning, I wanted to get this done before then. But anyways, the appeal and misuse of taxpayers' dollars, continuing the political narrative. The decision by Trudeau's Carney's government to appeal Judge Mosley's ruling is a continuation of the same political narrative that misrepresented the convoy. Instead of accepting the court's findings, the government is choosing to use public funds to prolong a legal battle that serves no purpose other than to defend their earlier overreach. And remember, Carney was the financial advisor during COVID, all right? And so don't think that, and he called us seditionists. He did a blog on the Freedom Convoy, etc. And so he could have easily dropped this and has not. Anyway, yeah, so it's just going to like possibly defend their earlier overreach. This was a wasteful expenditure of taxpayer dollars and a distraction from more pressing public concerns. There's so much going on right now. Undermining public trust. By appealing this ruling, the government risks further eroding public trust. The initial invocation of the Emergency Act was seen by many as a betrayal of democratic values and a disregard for constitutional rights. Doubling down on this stance through an appeal only deepens the perception that the government is more interested in defending its own narrative than in respecting the rights of its citizens. Yeah, they don't want to be proven wrong because Carney was involved in the decision making and he's a prime minister now. If this gets overturned, not overturned, but if it was deemed unconstitutional, which it was, which was already deemed unconstitutional 2 years ago, then this guy's going to look like more of an ass clown, because he already does. Like, he met with Trump and joking around, and he's like, oh, thanks for the promotion. I'm Mr. Burns. And President Trump was confused, and he's like, I guess he might have called him president or something like that. And then Trump's like, well, at least I didn't call you governor. You know, again, like, we need a stronger leader. What a fucking beta. Anyway. Okay, why it matters for democracy. First, this case is about ensuring that the government cannot simply label peaceful dissent as a national emergency to justify extraordinary measures. It's a safeguard against authoritarian overreach. If the court upholds Mosley's decision, it reaffirms that the rule of law and constitutional rights are paramount. It sends a message that no matter the political pressures, the government must act within the bounds of the law and respect the recommendations of law enforcement and the rights of the citizens. The role of key figures. Second, this decision is crucial because it holds accountable those who pushed for the Emergency Act, including figures like Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, Marco Mendicino, Bill Blair, and others. These officials bypassed law enforcement advice and took unprecedented steps that affected ordinary Canadians, such as freezing bank accounts without sufficient legal grounds. If the appeal overturns the ruling, it risks setting a precedent that such overreach is acceptable, eroding accountability, which is already eroded. Impact on ongoing cases. Finally, many Canadians are still fighting legal battles related to the convoy and the government's actions. The outcome of this appeal could influence those cases. If the court sides with the government, it could undermine efforts to seek justice and accountability for what many see as an abuse of power. A lot of people are waiting in the courts or have given up over the last few years because it's so much money for accountability and justice. And because of this, it's getting, again, they're getting their cases dismissed, appeals denied, etc., or having to wait in order to even be heard still. The unconstitutional overreach and its implications. In summary, the invocation of the Emergency Act during the Freedom Convoy was a clear example of constitutional overreach. The convoy, while large, remained largely peaceful and cooperative, and the existing laws were adequate to manage any issues that arose. By comparing it to other protests that were more violent or disruptive, it becomes clear that the response to the convoy was not about maintaining public order, but rather about quelling dissent that was politically inconvenient. This sets a troubling precedent for how protests are handled in Canada and raises serious concerns about the equal application of constitutional rights. So, conclusion. A call for accountability and respect for rights. Judge Mosley's ruling affirms that the use of the Emergency Act during the Freedom Convoy was unconstitutional. The Freedom Convoy was a largely peaceful protest that did not warrant such extreme measures, and the continued appeal is an unnecessary and costly endeavor that only serves to prolong division. Moving forward, it is essential for the government to respect constitutional rights and to ensure the response to public dissent are measured, lawful, and grounded in respect for democratic principles. And then I did do a comment just to further elaborate, because someone was saying that even CSIS did not, advise on the Emergency Act being declared, where I have, again, access to information requests that suggest otherwise, painting certain groups as right-wing extremists after the fact, after the Freedom Convoy had already started, in order to paint a different picture that was, again, politically motivated by Justin Trudeau and Carney and these clowns. And Marco Mendicino, by the way, he was a public safety officer. There's videos of him and Bill Blair too afraid to even touch a gun and fire on a range. They got the woman to do it. But he was joking about employing tanks on innocent citizens in Ottawa. Like, it's, they're so tough from a keyboard. So tough from a keyboard. I know countless guys like that again need to be fired from their friggin' positions, and people like myself hired back as the real experts. But anyway, so CSIS Director David Vigneault personally advised Prime Minister Trudeau that invocation was required, considering broader factors and an assumption that the Emergency Act's threshold differed from the CSIS Act definition. Because again, the Emergency Act being declared, it has to be connected to the CSIS Act. So this was not an official CSIS recommendation. That is true. This was not an official CSIS recommendation, but the CSIS director, David Vigneault, personally advised Prime Minister Trudeau that it was required. So where's the there's hypocrisy in this that has to be flushed out. Okay, so tied to the Section 16 criteria. That's the important part, because tied to the six. So CSIS did not recommend declaring the Emergency Act in February 2022 based on the definition of threats to the security of Canada under Section 16 of the Act, which references Section 2 of the CSIS Act. The agency assessed that the Freedom Convoy protests did not meet that threshold, while a 2024 federal court ruling later found the invocation unreasonable, in part because it failed to satisfy the CSIS Act definition. Okay, so this guy needs to be investigated as well. Politically driven, blackmailed, bribe, maybe, I don't know. Same thing with Wayne Eyre. I think possibly the same thing happened. Closed door conversation saying, hey, you're going to push this, even if it's unlawful and unconstitutional. Come on, guys. And I was emailing these guys too, not this guy, but I was emailing and messaging CSIS, my contacts there. I've worked with them. I have coins right in my office from CSIS and CBSA and RCMP, Global Affairs Canada, giving them all this information. Anyway, we'll see how it lands. All right, I don't have any more articles that I posted this morning. There were other things that I wanted to discuss, but I'm working on it first. So on that note, I will leave it at that. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.